Hello, welcome back to another Sojourner Light commentary. Today we're going to be talking about some of the Rainbow Six competitive changes that are coming to this 2023 season, and some concerns that I have, some things that I like to see, and I'm also going to be reading off a Twitter post that I made because I think that I put my thoughts out there pretty succinctly in this screenshot of a notepad that I did. But to catch you all up to speed onto the way that Rainbow Six competitive used to work was that there were basically four major regions, and a couple of them had subdivisions depending on which one they were. You had North America, North America. You had EU, Europe. You had APAC, and APAC was Asia Pacific divided into North and South divisions. Then you had LATAM, and LATAM was divided into three divisions, which were for Mexico, Brazil, and then the rest of South America. And then at the end of those three leagues being completed, the top teams would then compete in the Copa, I forget the name exactly, but these teams, the top teams from Mexico, South America, and Brazil, which I know South America and Brazil sounds strange, but it really was like Argentina and all the other countries, and then Brazil was its own region because it's such a massive competitive scene. Anyway, so all these teams would then come together and compete to then see who would be able to qualify for major. And it was a lot of really interesting competition, and specifically within the Americas scene and the EU scene, we also had Challenger League and a relegation system. Basically meaning that any teams that did really well over the year in Challenger League, depending on their overall placement, would then get a chance to go into a playoff series to then compete against the two lowest rated teams from the Pro League that year, in an opportunity to then swap places and relegation and promotion. This really is simple. It's a system that is used across a lot of different sports and a lot of like older franchise esports kind of things. And this was a really cool system for me to follow, especially in the Americas, because that was the league that I was able to catch the most, because I was able to follow all these teams as they were doing really well in Tier 2. Tier 2 being Challenger League. T1, when I say T1, I mean Tier 1, and that means Pro League. T2, Challenger League, and then T3 are like any teams that are below Challenger League but possibly contending for a spot in there. So you could follow these T2 teams and see like who was shaping up to be the best, because then at the end of the year you'd be like, oh yeah, I remember watching this team all the way throughout. I saw a lot of their stages. They looked really solid leading up to the end of the year. Let's see which Pro League team they might be taking down with them, or maybe they don't get to Pro League and this team just barely manages to hold on, but they can always have a chance at the next year. It was something that we could consistently follow in the Rainbow Six scene. But then the end of 2022, they announced that they were going to be revamping the system and making it so that there were 9 definitive that there were 9 definitive regions. I don't know why I'm burping so much lately. I've been really gassy. I don't know what that is. That doesn't matter. There were 9 definitive regions. This being now Asia Pacific was then divided into South Asia, Japan, Korea, and Oceania. You now have Middle East and North Africa, which had 0 representation previously, even though there were some Saudi E-leagues going on around the time, which are some like Tier 3 competitions. They were never really taking off the ground because they just never really had an audience to begin with. But that's a new region added in there. EU and NA stay the same. And then I think it's also Brazil and then LATAM. And then one more in Latin America. I'm not looking at a spreadsheet right now. I'm just going off the top of my head. So I apologize if I'm not remembering this all accurately. And it's really cool to see this expansion. And I think this is where I can launch into reading what I wrote on the Twitter post, because it very succinctly explains what I have to say here without me trying to divulge into tangents and stuff. And I'll come back around and talk about things. So the new competitive format recently expanded to allow for 9 separate regions in the professional circuit, giving greater opportunity to more local teams in smaller regions that might have had a variety of accessibility related constraints like ping differences between countries. Quite often in South Asia, you would have teams from Taiwan playing against teams from Malaysia or Indonesia, and then India and Bangladesh also all had a bunch of different teams all competing together in different Asian leagues and stuff. But because there was no distinction between, what South Asia contains specifically, there just wasn't any sort of room for a lot of countries that weren't in that sort of more southeastern belt like Indonesia and Taiwan to compete, because the ping difference would have been too great for them. But now at major SI events, we might finally begin to see an extremely diverse worldwide representation of players, among which I'm very excited to see how teams from Middle East and North Africa size up to other giants in the competition, because like I said before, there was no representation for Middle East and North Africa, and I think that's really cool to see that all possibly have some fruition. I'd like to see what happens with teams from there. The positive thing is that with a much slower and broader format, teams are allowed more time to rest and recuperate following prior performances and then prepare themselves for the upcoming stage, and it helps a ton in the way of avoiding burnout for all of those involved. So previously, every year we would have 3 stages, and these would be very rapid fire events that would basically have games on every day, and it burned players out because they were just playing Siege all the frickin' time. There was no time to rest and recuperate. There was no time for them to readjust their strategies or try to address what they did poorly in the last stage then before they could launch into the other with an actual semblance of a break. And I think this is really, really healthy for the long-term mentality of the professional scene. But what this new format has done, though, is it has seemingly eliminated consistent T2 and T3 competitions. There are some very clear sets of tournaments that T2 teams can engage in to then qualify for majors directly, which gives a lucky T2 team the opportunity to play at stages that they'd never been able to before, which is really cool in theory. But at that point, are these tournaments genuinely good representations of the conglomerate skill of the teams involved? If a team has a bad day in a tournament and they botch their chances off of a single set of poor performances, then the team no longer has as much of a clear-cut opportunity to continue honing their skills against other teams of their caliber. Sure, there are scrims that exist, but from what I understand, a system akin to what we had for Challenger League does not anymore. There is no day in, day out consistent play period, no league placements to cheer or groan over, like how Aqualix looked really promising in the early stages of 2022 before just dropping entirely in stage 3, for example. There's no storylines to be built aside from following the next new collection of promising T2/T3 players that have haphazardly named themselves something along the lines of L plus ratio D's nuts bozo. And I say that in jest, but there was legitimately a team in the South Asia qualifiers recently who got first place in the qualifiers, and their team name is literally just Wasted Bozo, because what else are they going to name themselves? Even though it's a funny name to follow and everything, there's no real identity to that beyond that. When I say the team name Space Station, although rest in peace the core of that team as well, you might think of Bosco, Rampy, Foltz, even though Bosco and Rampy are no longer on the team. It's only Foltz and Houghton that are left. But Bosco, Rampy, Foltz was the core. They were the definitive 3 guys for 5 years on Space Station Gaming. And that kind of legacy that they were able to build over years was there, versus Wasted Bozo. It's okay, maybe that doesn't sound like a team name that's really set out for longevity. That's just a funny Twitter reply name. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll be proven totally wrong, and I'd be really glad to see that. And second of all, there's no relegation system, which I understand that gives teams long-term financial stability because they no longer have to fear dropping to a lower funded league. But personally, I would absolutely cheer for Mirage as an org to get relegated out of Pro League, considering how they have avoided paying their players. The fact that the org is allowed to continue competing in NAL with zero repercussions is appalling, and I would pray for their downfall in exchange for seeing a team like Reality TV compete in their place. On a lesser note, Beast Coast was also horrendous in terms of its performances this last year, and with the old system, they wouldn't have been allowed to stay in. It would have been interesting to see if a team promoted from Challenger League could take their place and perform better, but now those teams have been pushed further away and forced to work on a vastly more inconsistent tournament schedule. And these are things that I can attest to as a spectator, and I'm sure that I've missed several details. In fact, I'm willing to admit that I'm outright wrong on a lot of this. This is just the information that I've been able to gather, and would like some clarification on just how awful this really is for the long-standing health of the competitive scene. So that's my argument. That's how I feel about the upcoming season of Rainbow Six Siege. I actually really enjoyed watching Challenger League as well, because these were very promising players that we might see go to Pro League, or they were players that had gotten promoted there but also looked totally out of place, and so that mismatch of skill and the level of mistakes and the way that it just wasn't quite as clean and clear cut or clinical as Pro League was previously. This new system that we have is just like, oh yeah, I really want to follow oh my gosh, what was the name? The Triple G squad gang. I don't know what it was called, but it was a bunch of there was like Kool-Aid, who played for Parabellum. There was Mohesi and Melted, who were for Mirage previously, and two other players whom I can't remember off the top of my head, but these were all players who were in Pro League that then got a chance at being in Challenger League, and they did qualify for the next stage of the tournaments that could potentially take them to a major. But that's the thing. It's just a bunch of ex-pro players who were dropped by their rosters because I don't know what Parabellum's doing and Mirage didn't pay their players. It's all these ex-players who, if they have one bad tournament day or have one bad tournament game, they are knocked out. That's it. Like, that is all there is for them. There is no longer a consistent like, I'm just repeating myself again because this is how infuriating this truly is. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out there. I wanted to let you all know what is going on and the things that I enjoy, because I think that Rainbow Six has the potential to be a really cool esport, but when it is lacking some depth in terms of how much further can I follow these teams and these players to, like, oh yeah, they did well in a tournament once. Like, that doesn't make any sense. That it frustrates me. So I don't know if I'm parsing this information incorrectly. Maybe I misread somewhere, and right now for this stage they're not doing a Challenger League because it would take too much for them to set up, and then they're doing it at a later time, which would be kind of cool. But for now it doesn't seem like it's actually going anywhere. It just seems like we have Pro League and some collections of players and that's about it. Anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble. Hope you guys have a good day. Take care. Bye.